Welcome to Webinar 9 in our 12-part Value Gap series. So, up until now, we've talked about how to prepare your business or your client's business for a successful exit and how to navigate the sale process itself. Today, we're going to shift gears a bit. Today is about the day after the wire hits your bank. Before we get into it, though, here's a question that most business owners have yet to answer. You already know the number for the day that you sell, right? But do you have a number for the day after?
It's that second number, John, that is the one almost no one has, like you mentioned, because you can tell me, or a business owner can tell me the target price almost to the decimal. Um, Ask what the money does in the morning after the wire clears, and it gets really quiet and really unclear.
Yes, and that quiet is not necessarily a knowledge problem. These are genuinely very sharp people that we're talking about here, people that have built something very real, something very valuable. So it's not a knowledge problem, it's a timing problem. The plan for the money gets started far too late.
As do a lot of the planning aspects of exit planning. So, let me tell you exactly who this is for today. So obviously, this is for business owners that are doing a sizable amount of business in terms of your EBITDA, because we're looking at the multiple. You're somewhere between 1 and 5 years from selling your business, which, by the way, if you don't have that number, that means you're there at some point. And the other reality is that the day to start exit planning is today. I don't care if you started the business yesterday. Um, and if you've spent far more time thinking about the sale than about the proceeds that turn into the after the sale. So if that's you, stick around, because here's the deal that we make in every one of these webinars, and we're going to make again today. For the time that we have together, um, we have two goals. One is obviously we want to teach you the four departments every post sale portfolio has to run. This is the value proposition. And so, um, whether you've named them or not, we're going to share them with you. That part is yours to keep. That is the education that we promise every time. The second is that if this lands the way we think it will, we're going to ask you and invite you to a conversation with us at the end, and that is the pitch, right? It's actually not a sales pitch; it's just a value gap assessment. We're going to get into the details. So now that you know what's coming, I just want you to sit back, relax, and think of this information as your plan to exit your business.
And Mike, before we go any further, this is the time where the suits and the bean counters would like me to remind everybody here today that everything that we discussed today is educational in nature. It is not specific financial, tax, or legal advice. Your situation has details that are unique to you, and anything we cover here should be reviewed with your personal advisory team before you act on it. And if you do not have a personal advisory team, what are you thinking, man? We have literally an entire webinar dedicated to this topic. Yes, it's that important. So, if you haven't seen that yet, you can find it on our YouTube channel at AVR Wealth Management.
Well done, John, with the plug.
Thank you.
So great. Now that we've got that out of the way, we want to clear up some objections that we typically walk into when we talk to owners. And we also do this every webinar. We want to put everything out on the table that you may or may not be thinking. And if you're not, then it might be something that triggers a question. So if you're like most owners that we talk to, like you already have these preconceived notions and arguments in your head as to why you can and cannot do things. The first one that we tend to see is I'll deal with the money after I sell. Right now, I need to focus on getting the deal done. That is the most common and is exactly the belief this session is built to challenge.
And here's why. Some of the moves that matter most for what you keep and what your capital does, they need to be in place well before the closing. In our experience, that window tends to run about 18 to 24 months out. After the letter of intent is signed, a lot of those options are off the table and they simply disappear.
So the second one that we hear is that my CPA handles this and my wealth guy handles the investments. And it's fair. but your CPA files returns and your wealth manager watches a portfolio. So the question is who is running the whole system? So those two are pointed at the same plan. And so in most cases, I'll tell you that nobody's getting together and pointing this ship in the right direction.
And this is something worth repeating, although we've said this in every one of our webinars so far. We are assuming going into this that each of the advisors that you're working with, they're already doing a good job inside their respective lanes. The trouble is that what happens to your proceeds doesn't always live inside of any one particular lane. It very often is going to live at the intersection of those lanes. And the intersections need a certain amount of coordination, not just compliance. So let me give you an analogy here. Imagine you pulled up to a four-way stop sign and you and the other drivers at the intersection were only focused on your respective lanes. So you stopped at that intersection because you have a stop sign staring you in your lane. And without any coordinating with the other drivers in the other lanes, you just proceed right through the intersection. Now, of course, you wouldn't do that. That would be a disaster. But it takes a certain amount of coordination to safely navigate that intersection. For example, there's already an established protocol for this situation. Typically, the driver on your right has the right of way, but that very often isn't enough. I don't know if you do this, but I do this. Don't you look at the other drivers to assess what they intend to do? Sometimes you might even make eye contact with them, and sometimes one of them might even wave you through the intersection. Now, we never think of it like in these terms before because we've been driving for so long and we just do this instinctively. But here's the bigger question. Why wouldn't you want the same type of coordination and protocol systems in place for something as important as the sale of your business?
John, that's that's a great analogy. I never thought about it in those terms. I mean, you don't want all four cars going at one time.
No, you don't.
That'd be a bad thing.
That's right.
Awesome. So the third kind of myth and misconception that we hear is that it is a big brokerage account. How complicated can it be? Well, here's the truth. A pile of money with no plan is simpler than a business. Or is not simpler than running a business, right? It is a business onto itself. And so funded on day one with no job description written yet is kind of a plan for disaster, right? You have to have a plan for that kind of money. The fourth, this is a big family office thing. This is for people that are way past me, right? And the reality is it's not. You don't need $100 million to run these types of systems and to be efficient with your money. You need advisors to stop working in separate rooms. That's the kicker, right? This is a structure that helps build and protect that wealth against those eroding factors of money. So before we go on, we also like to share with you guys who we are, because I think it matters in a conversation like this, because there's a lot of information online that come from people that are not licensed, that have picked up a microphone and just talk. And it's not always entirely true. So as licensed professionals, we're held to a different standard. So I came from the investment banking side, raised $42 million for businesses while I was building my own understanding how the financial world actually works at the ownership level. I completed my MBA during that process. And after working with the companies that I did, I really kept noticing a couple things. The advisors around each of the owners were good at their own jobs, but nobody was coordinating the actual plan. And so one of the reasons I became a wealth advisor was to close that gap. And this reason why John and I do these webinars. And so to coordinate the team, like we have to hold them accountable, make sure that they're all doing what they said they were going to do in the order in which they need to do it. And so what I do today as a wealth advisor with Avier, and as the director of strategic relationships with the National Referral Network, and along with John, is to coordinate those teams.
And my name is John Heck. For those of you who don't know, I've spent more than 3 decades in financial services, working primarily with business owners at various stages of personal and business growth, as well as exit planning. And the pattern that I often see is this: some very, very smart people with very experienced advisors that have real credentials on all sides. Yet there tends to be a gap between them that nobody is responsible for closing. So one of my responsibilities in the work that we do here is to take these concepts that Mike and I talk about in these webinars and translate them into a process. And when we talk about building a coordinated financial team, I'm typically the one who maps out what that coordination actually looks like step by step. What gets communicated, how often, who's accountable for making sure that it all happens.
Perfect. So now all the compliance and all the introductions are out of the way. Here is the core belief I want to challenge today. Most owners believe the post-exit planning is something you do after the exit. You sell, the money lands in the account, and then you go figure out what to do with it. And I'm going to tell you that that sequence, although feels right, it is absolutely backwards.
Yes, the timing is everything here, Mike. The structuring that has the most leverage on what you keep and what your capital produces, that all has to be set up well before the sale is done. Once the deal closes, you're working with what's left, not with the full set of options that you had 18 or 24 months earlier. And you cannot go back and backdate those moves. So we talk about a runway a lot, and that runway has to, you either have to use it or you have to lose it.
So here's the shift that I want you to kind of start planting the seed with. The machine that places your business has to be built before you sell the business, not after. So by the time the wire hits, the parts that mattered most needed they need to be already running, so that, which we're going to get into this as to the reason why, but you can't wait for those, right? So here is the frame that makes it simple, because you already know how to do this because you've been running a business, and in a business there are departments. So it's some formal, just some are just living in your head, but the reality is that you know the structures already. You just need to transfer them over to the wealth side, because your capital is really a second company, and it needs the same departments, staffed a little bit differently, but still staffed the same way that you have yours. And so we call this the capital operating system. There are 4 departments. There's growth or income, growth, defense, and succession. Your business ran all 4 of these, and the day you sell, all 4 stop at once, and the capital has to pick them up.
And the reason that we package it this way is that owners are already thinking in terms of departments, like Mike has pointed out. So you're not learning a foreign language here. What you're doing is you're applying the management skills that you already have to an asset that perhaps you haven't managed before. That's it.
And it's not complicated. I mean, you get in the weeds, it's complicated. So here's the question that John and I have, right? We're going to walk through this process as we do with every one of our webinars. There's always a takeaway. But if we can show you how these 4 departments can help benefit you after the sale in the time that we have together, and even one of them turns out to be a department you have not even thought about or staffed, what we ask you is to take a serious consideration in scheduling our gap assessment. Okay? The information will be at the end of the webinar. We're not trying to pitch you. We're not trying to sell you. We're not trying to replace your team. We just want to give you the tools to be more successful as you go into this exit process. So if you're good with that, stick around. We're going to jump into the rest of this and really the nuts and bolts now. So as always, we also want to share 2 owners, right? We always go through these scenarios. They're illustrative purposes, but the reason we do this is because in some of these illustrations, most likely you can see yourself within these individuals, okay? So same businesses, same sale price, 2 completely different outcomes. The difference is not the deal. It is whether the system was built before or after the close, right? So owner 1 sells first, then goes looking for a plan. The proceeds land in one account, hands it over to a broker he likes and hopes it works out. There are no departments that were built because he's been treating 30 years of equity as a single pile of money instead of a system with jobs that have to be done.
And here's what tends to happen to owner number one mechanically. The money has no assignment, so it kind of drifts. It's like, like think of a boat drifting on a sea. It kind of goes back and forth. Part of it at times is going to be too conservative because maybe the owner's nervous. Part of it is going to be too aggressive at times because he gets bored. The CPA, his attorney, and his advisor, they still haven't sat down in the same room together to coordinate the plan as one cohesive unit. The plan then becomes a collection of accounts. It's not so much a system.
Okay, so now you've got that in your head. Let's talk about owner two. Same scenario, business sale, all that stuff. However, before the LOI is even signed, this owner stands up and sets up these 4 departments. Each one has a job. So now when the wire hits, it does not land in a checking account. It actually lands into the machine that is already ready and starts to run.
And the difference here is timing. It's not talent. Owner number 2 is not smarter than owner number 1. She just sequenced the whole thing correctly. She used the runway while she still had it. Again, use it or lose it. If you got the runway, you might as well use it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because here's the reality. Most owners, I'm gonna point to you watching. Most owners are owner 1, plain and simple. Not because they're careless, but because everyone around them was focused on the sale. Everyone around them was focused on cash flow. Everyone around them was focused on the sales, and everybody was focused on everything other than what do you want to do at the end of your business. And more importantly, nobody was assigned to the day after. So that gap is not a character flaw. It's just missing departments and missing communication between those professionals.
And let me start with the most basic piece first, because in my opinion, this is where the real confusion lies. There are 2 different numbers at play here. The owners tend to collapse them all into one. But there's the lump sum that you receive, and then there's the income that lump sum has to produce for the rest of your life. And those are not necessarily the same number, and they do not behave in the same way. In fact, in many instances, they shouldn't be behaving in the same way.
So I kind of want you to say that back to yourself here, right? So you've got a lump sum, and then you've got a lump sum that pays you, right? So the sale price is not your income. It is the source your income now has to come from. It's a completely different strategy. The day you sell, I want to be clear with this, is the day you stop being paid from your business. You understand that? The day you sell is the day your business stops paying you. So you have to treat this portfolio as your new income. And most owners have not separated these 2 things. They haven't separated these 2 mindsets. They put this into one department when it needs to be multiple departments that are managed completely differently. So the question is what are those 4 departments? Well, let's walk through them. The first one is the income that we just talked about. It is the paycheck problem. And it is the one that surprises people the most. So for years, your business has paid you. It's paid you a salary, distributions, all kinds of variations that you and your CPA have come up with to pay you the money. And a whole stack of personal costs it quietly covered that you probably stopped noticing because it just paid the bills. But the day you sell, every dollar of that stops at one time.
So the income department, technically it has one job, and that is to rebuild that cash flow from the capital itself in a very structured way. That's very, very important. And I'm going to add something to this. When you're building the business, you're in a growth mindset, and to treat this income section or this income department in the same manner in which you had or the same mindset that you had when you were in growth mode, that's a very dangerous thing to do. Um, but what's important about this is that this base has to last, because it has to last your lifetime, or in some cases for generations. So this becomes a design question before it's an investment question. And so what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, how much income needs to be produced and how often? Does it need to come out monthly, quarterly, or annually? How reliable does it need to be for your particular set of circumstances? In other words, does that figure need to be an exact dollar amount? And how long does it need to last for? Do you need that to last for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, maybe a lifetime? Here's another question: whose lifetime? Your lifetime, your spouse's lifetime, or both? Or is there anyone else with special needs, for example, within your family that needs to be accounted for? Does the income need to be guaranteed, or can it fluctuate from time to time? And where should that income be coming from? These are just the before you ever get to the investment options.
And John mentioned it a little bit in that. So the second department is what John talked about, is the growth. This is the long time horizon money. This is a part of the capital that keeps working, so the machine ultimately, hopefully, outlasts you. It is deliberately separate from the money that you live on, because the two have different jobs and different time frames, like John just talked about.
Yeah, the point here is that the income and the growth should not be the same dollars doing double duty. Again, the mindset and the strategies of the growth mode. Okay, now growth becomes an important part going forward, but you now also have an income component, and those two strategies require a different skill set to do properly and to do well. So when the owners tend to make emotional moves at exactly the wrong times when they do that. So separating them by the job that these dollars are designed to do, we like to call them in our industry different buckets. So you got the income bucket and you got your growth bucket. That's what keeps the short-term strategy from wrecking the long-term plan, and vice versa.
So actually, John, I've got this client right now that is closing on their business, and we were able to structure the portfolio where 40% of the net proceeds generated the income that they were looking for. Now we've got a 6-month window to grow that, but in 6 months, 40% of the income will generate, or 40% of the portfolio will generate the money that he needs, right? So that's the separate bucket,
Yeah, exactly.
which leaves 60% of that bucket to grow. It'll create a little bit more income, but like, this is how important it is to structure portfolios to satisfy both in these situations. So extremely important, because then the third department is actually defense, which is tax and actual asset protection. And so it does not end at the closing. A lot of owners think the tax event is a one-time thing on the day they sell. The ongoing tax drag on the capital every year after its own department. And so keeping that built, shielding the money, is critically important to understand how to protect against taxation and inflation.
And it's so important to understand that this is a different conversation from the transaction tax and the asset protection that we cover in other sessions. This is the ongoing tax posture and protection on the liquid capital going forward. It's a completely different problem that requires a different department with a different set of skills.
So fourth department, you've already kind of went through an exit, but the fourth department is succession, and that is the one almost nobody staffs until it's way too late. So every business owner, like we've talked about, needs an exit plan. This is what this whole series is about, is developing your exit plan. But ultimately, so does the money. So who runs this system when you cannot, right? How does the machine keep running without you at the center of it?
Mike, this is an area in which I have an extensive amount of experience in, and I could talk for an hour or more on this very topic alone. But for this session, we want to call succession its own department, and we want to just kind of limit it to that for now, for the sake of time. The full multi-generational build, the governance of this department and the structures involved, it's its own topic, and we can cover that separately in a different webinar. But today, I want you to just understand that the point is simply this: it's a very, very critical element or department, and most people have left that department or that chair completely empty.
Yeah, it is unfortunate because I think there was a hashtag a long time ago that said bad things happen to good people, right? And that's just the reality. And if you don't have things in place to protect your assets, your family, then bad things happen. And you want to make sure that you have protection in place before that. Um, so we'll leave that at that. And maybe John and I talked about this before we jumped on here about what to talk about after this 12 part. Maybe we'll do that. Um, so now what I want to do is, kind of what we do a lot of things in a lot of these webinars is kind of a little activity, right? So it doesn't take very long. And is one of the more useful numbers most owners have never written down, or they have it in their head, but they've never really seen it. And so we call that the paycheck replacement number.
All right, so here's the method. We're going to just go through this step by step. And what I want you to do is just write down these three figures if you have something to write on. Number one is, what is the salary that the business is paying you in a year? What's the amount? Number two, what's the amount of the distributions that you take each year in addition to your salary? And then number three, what's the closest estimate? You don't have to get too specific here, but what's the closest estimate of the personal expenses that the business covers for you in a year? For example, the car payment, the phone, the travel, memberships, whatever runs through the company, I want you to write that number down as well. Now, lastly, just add those three figures together.
And that's the number that disappears when you close. Surprise! I know that sounds bad. It does. But that is the number that income department that we talked about has to rebuild from the capital, from the proceeds. This is why it's critically important to have a plan post-sale, because that number goes away. And the new number is what this capital needs to generate. So once again, it's not the sale price. So look at that number. And for most owners, seeing it written down for the first time is the moment that, well, I hope that things start to become real in terms of how important it is to start planning the actual exit post-sale.
So let me give you an example of what Mike's talking about here. Of course, this is an illustrative example. It's not a specific client. So let's call this person Tom. And let's say Tom sold a good business at a fair price, and he did it in the common order. He closed the deal first, and then he set out to plan for the money. Secondly, as a second thought. By the time Tom came to look at the money and the wire had already landed in the bank, and several of the strategies that would have done the most good for what he was able to keep and how his income was structured, they needed to have been in place well before the letter of intent was signed. Okay, they were not options any longer because he didn't do it that way. The window had simply closed when the deal closed.
And here is the part that we see with business owners that really sting, and why we tell Tom's story. So once again, Tom did nothing wrong at the closing. He did nothing wrong in the exit. He got a fair deal. The problem was he just started that second company, the capital side of it, on the day it was already fully funded with nothing built. There was no plan in place. He just went into it blind. And the cost was not a bad sale. It was just a missed runway, a missed opportunity to actually build something that was going to launch day one. Okay. So now the other side, once again, illustrative purposes, but I'm going to tell you that we see so many of our clients in these illustrations, we just can't say that this is who they are. Okay. So Carlos Susan, same idea, opposite sequence, just flipped it. Okay. So well before the LOI, Susan sat with her advisor, her CPA, her attorney, all of them in one room, and really started to structure these four departments in a way that suited her based off of a financial plan, looking at the numbers so she knew exactly from day one how much runway she would have in terms of cash flow, and then how much of the portfolio would actually generate along the way.
So mechanically, what that meant is that each department had a job description long before the money existed. So income knew exactly what it had to replace. Growth was separated out. Defense had a posture set for years into the future, not just the day of the closing. And the succession chair had also been filled.
So when Susan's wire hit, it did not land in a checking account, right? And it didn't wait for her to figure things out. It actually landed in the appropriate account that the system was set up for. And then it went to work for her day two, right? So same sale that Tom had, but you can see completely different scenarios the morning after. And the difference simply, and this is a very simple concept, it was simply the order in which things were set up. Tom set up things after. Susan set up things before and got things running very efficiently. Say that's the difference. So here's where we are. We have four departments: income, growth, defense, succession. Built before the sale, they turn into a system the wire lands into and starts working for you day one. If you leave it until after, it turns into a scramble around a pile of money, and it might take weeks to get the money deployed and actually working to get clarity.
So the precise cost here is a timing cost. It's a timing issue. Every quarter that you move closer to the sale is a quarter of options that just quietly drop off the table. The runway that you have right now is the most valuable part of all of this. And it's the part that shrinks whether you act on it or not. So again, this runway is a thing that you either use it or you lose it.
And let's be clear, doing nothing is not staying neutral, right? Doing nothing is falling behind. It is choosing to build the system later. You're making a choice to do this later. You're making a choice to potentially have lack of clarity. Money falls through the cracks. To John's point, you have fewer options, but now you're under more pressure because now you have to do it, right? So doing due diligence on something under pressure is far harder than doing it when you have a runway. So that is the choice. With a closing date on it and the date of your sale, that is the choice that you're making by not putting these in place ahead of time. So if you need help building the capital operating system while you still have a runway, right? Because if you haven't even thought about an exit, you still have a runway. And it's to build a business right now, to build an exit plan is the time to start. That is what we do. That's how we help business owners. So at the start, obviously we make the same deal every time. I said, if we teach you something that is valuable and that you could use, in this case, it's the four departments. And if that landed, which I hope it did, we would invite you to a conversation. So you now have the four departments. You can do your self-assessment to see if you're ready for an exit. But if you're not, here's the invitation. We call it the value gap assessment. It's a complimentary working conversation so we get to know you.
So Mike and I are not valuation experts, and we are not certified exit planners, and we do not pretend to be those things. What we are is the coordination layer that we keep talking about. We're the team builders. Mike likes to say the financial quarterback. We get to know your situation well enough to point you in the right direction to the right strategic partner for where you actually are in the process and where it is that you want to be.
John, maybe I should get the SEPA. a certified exit planning advisor. Huh, just thought about that. Thought about it before. Maybe I should. So then we wouldn't have to say that anymore. So this call, you guys, is really discovery. It's not an analysis. We're gonna have a conversation. We're gonna ask about your timeline. I'll tell you, most businesses don't even have one, so we're gonna help establish one. What is this number that we're talking about here? What's gonna need to be replaced? What is the what is your number to sell the business? Have you thought about it? We're gonna ask these questions. And then we're not gonna hand you a plan on the call. So we're not gonna sell you any products either. That's not what we're here. The value gap assessment is a working conversation where we get to know your situation, all these questions that I just mentioned, well enough to determine which of our strategic partners is the right fit for you right now. So the takeaway of this conversation is not you buying anything. The takeaway is that you knowing who you should talk to next and what that conversation should focus on. That is the whole point of this, is to get you from where you are to one step closer to where you want to be. That's it.
And the reason to have this conversation now rather than after the deal closes is the same reason that we've spent the entire session talking about timing. The coordination is worth the most while you still have that runway. Again, use it or lose it. This again, Mike said this is not a sales pitch. It's just the mechanics on how these things work.
So the question is how do you schedule the call? And here's how you do it. You can scan the QR code. It'll go to our calendar link. It is labeled this webinar, so you know you're on the right calendar link, or you can go to the little URL that's below the calendar link. So either one works. Book your value gap assessment. Bring your paycheck replacement number with you. I think that'll be an interesting part of the conversation, right? Because it's the one figure that we went through. And if you don't remember what that is, go ahead and rewind the recording and work through that exercise. But before we close, I want to look at what's next, right? In the next session, we're going to go from building the system to the part that almost nobody prepares for. And this is the mental and emotional side of actually letting the business go.
Yeah, this pairs directly with what we talked about today. Today was the machine that replaces the business. Next time we get together is going to be the harder question of who you are once the business is no longer the thing that you run. It's a huge emotional and psychological shift, and it's a different department entirely, but it's critically important. So don't miss that one.
It is so important. So thanks for giving us your time today, as you have in all these other webinars that we've done. We've actually got 3 left, which is exciting. So go run the paycheck replacement number if you haven't done so already. And if you want help building the system around it, schedule the time, get on our calendars, let us know how we can help. But we look forward to seeing you in the next session.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.